Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Rangers Review morning briefing for Wednesday, the 2nd of November. I'm Derek Clark, and I'm joined this morning by Joshua Barrie. How are we getting on, Joshua?
Yeah, I'm good, Derek. Not a good performance last night whatsoever. I think far and away from what Rangers needed, not just to restore some pride in the Champions League, but try and retain some momentum. So, in a way, I feel we're back to the conversation that we were having before the Aberdeen game.
Yeah, the good thing about it is, Joshua, there is no more Champions League matches ahead of us. So that is the only real plus side to last night's defeat against Ajax at Ibrox, a 3-1 loss. They were just a class above, Joshua. At the end of the day, the Rangers conceded a goal early on. A bit of a calamity in defence, as has been the norm for much of the campaign. They lost a second goal before half-time. Ajax threatened to run riot, but Rangers sort of, could you say, weathered the storm. They came out and had a bit of a go in the second half. James Tavernier converts a penalty, coolly taken, I'd have to say. But that comeback, those comeback hopes lasted all of about 40 seconds before Conceição ran up the park and tucked away number 3, and that's how it ended. In terms of last night, Joshua, I think no one was expecting Rangers to turn Ajax over and win 5-0 and qualify for the Europa League. But what they did want is a battling performance despite the raft of injuries. I mean, it was pretty much a second string there last night. The midfield and defence in particular were severely depleted. We all know about the injury situation at Ibrox. But it was just a tough watch, wasn't it? I think everyone was just hoping for that final whistle to be sounded, put us out of misery, and then we can move on. It was another disappointing performance, wasn't it?
Oh, hugely so. And it became evident, I think, from that first goal after 3 minutes that this is going to be a long evening in which, you know, as I say, that momentum that was built on Saturday is slowly punctured by another Rangers performance in which, yes, injuries making an impact. 10 players, I think it was, Rangers had out last night, but this isn't isolated to this game. And I think the messaging from Van Bronckhorst throughout has been difficult for supporters to stomach because, as we've made the point before, the wage gap was big between Rangers and Dortmund and Leipzig. How was there much of a difference in level between Dortmund and Ajax and Leipzig? I don't think hugely. And yes, you can say that Rangers maybe didn't perform as well against Ajax. Yes, it was an exception that allowed them to get through against Dortmund and Leipzig. But they still are able of performing much better than they did, and that's where their frustration will come into it in spite of the level of opposition and in spite of the quality they possess. And I think that's where the frustration will come in at the manager as well. Instead of coming out and maybe looking at his own team's performance more, I think he was dealt a difficult hand last night with the team that he had to pick. Stephen Davis and Scott Arfield still in midfield, and obviously both fantastic servants, but people can't play forever. So again, it provokes those wider questions about squad building. Rangers have made some good acquisitions in the summer, but did they prioritise certain areas that needed it more? I think it's hard to say that they shouldn't have signed another midfielder personally. Obviously, injuries have again been a bit of an anomaly at the back because Connor Goldson, who thought he would get injured, and therefore the centre-back position wouldn't have been as problematic as it's proved to be. But the predominant issue for me is the fact that, Van Bronckhorst, you might, I don't know if you've got the quote in front of you, Derek, but he said something along the lines of he knows what it's like to be on the other side in the Champions League when you are winning. I don't know if have you got that to hand, or am I going to?
Yeah. I'll just quickly read it. It was interesting. He was asked, could he put his finger on what it was that was why it went so wrong, pretty much. And I'll just read what he says here. He says, I've competed in this competition and I've won this competition, so I know the other side. When you're the team who comes on the pitch and already know you're going to win because of the difference, that's the other side. And now I face the side of the team who's not on the same level yet. And we struggled against Liverpool, against Ajax, and against Napoli, teams who are operating in this league for years now, and not only operating but also playing finals and winning Champions Leagues, and that's been hard for us. So he's touching on when he was obviously playing for Barcelona and a lesser extent Arsenal, when he was taking on teams in the Champions League, and you almost felt you were going to win before you even entered the pitch. And there's a feeling, Joshua, that Rangers were beat before they entered the field of play for much of these games.
That's not a good comment. I just think that's, you've got to read the room. People will naturally be frustrated. People don't want to hear diplomatic reasons as to why the level is what it is. Again, what is the alternative to not enter the competition? I mean, what do the players want? What's the message in the dressing room beforehand? I'm sure that the manager is not saying to them, "Listen, lads, I know what it's like to be on the other side." So you imagine he still is trying to cajole them into a win. But then I think when you come out and make comments like that after, it kind of can misconstrue that message. There was a feeling after 3 minutes, yeah, absolutely. Rangers conceded soft goals, more concessions down the right. 4 goals I can think of off the top of my head. Aberdeen, Livingston, 2 last night, which derived from the right-hand side. And I think they've struggled a lot in this group stage with their defensive approach, which was so useful on the way to Seville, but it was useful and it was really aggressive. Last night, Rangers kept a 2v1 at the back, and therefore were kind of outnumbered all over the rest of the pitch, and Ajax just passed through them at will. Ajax, for what it's worth, I think they kind of dropped their intensity at moments as well. There was a period in the first half when they were 2-0 up and they were going forward time for a wee 5-minute spell, and you were thinking this could be a third again. And much like the Napoli game, if it goes to 3-0 before halftime, then you're in a case of damage limitation after the break. But yeah, overall, Derek, I remember the day after Eindhoven when you were waiting on the group stage draw, and there was so much anticipation at what Rangers could do in this competition. So naturally, that tells of the mood then compared to now. And it's not been fun. It's not been enjoyable. I think it's been humiliating for people to see and players to see Rangers record the worst ever Champions League group stage result. So the scars, I think, of this group stage, regardless of the opposition, will exist for a while, because it's hard to sit through 6 games like that and look at the positives or just put it down to the level, because I just don't think that's how football works.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because, like you say, that is not a record you want on your CV, if you like. But at the same time, he has been hampered by a ridiculous amount of injuries. Players on the sidelines, not only just players on the sidelines, key players that would start that game last night. It's a good comment that comes in from the Wasp here. 2 holding midfielders combined age of 71 is never going to outrun a dynamic Ajax side. I think he had no choice. I think we discussed possibly Glenn Kamara starting the game, Joshua, prior to the match. Would you like to have seen him start as opposed to either Arfield or Davis in there?
Yeah, I guess the argument would be that maybe because he's just come back from injury, he could only play, 30 minutes or whatever, and obviously we don't know that. So, ideally, but also he's kind of been out the side of the picture for a while. I think the bigger issue for me is the Rangers setup, which, obviously the people at the club will understand a lot better than us. They'll understand a lot better what they're trying to do. But it doesn't, again, and time again in these Champions League games when Rangers sit off, but they go man for man at points and they're pulled apart by the movement of the other team. I don't know what you think on this, Derek, but you don't look at Rangers sitting in that defensive bank and think that's going to be difficult to break down. I think it's far too easy to go through, and I don't think that helps. And obviously, it's a different style from Gerrard's impenetrable formation, and there's benefits and constraints like any do. But I just don't think it's set up for success in the same way as that. I don't think you've, as I say, Van Bronckhorst's European games at home, when they've been so successful, has been when it's been so aggressive and on the front foot. Maybe aside from a game like PSV, where they kind of went toe-to-toe with PSV in possession. But sometimes you just do watch games and you're at games and you sense the difference in atmosphere compared to Ajax at home and PSV at home, who are, as sides, they're not levels apart. They're playing at the weekend. I'd be very surprised if one or the other is a 5-6-0 victor, although maybe that's famous last words. The mood has changed a lot since then, but I think that also shows that when you're going into these types of games, if you're coming off the back of numerous results, it must be hard for players as well. It must impact the mood in the dressing room, etc., etc. So, yeah, last night was important to try and not puncture that momentum. But now, I know three more games, I think, until the break, Derek, and Rangers obviously just need to get there with the amount of injuries they have. But I think they still need good performances. They still need a couple more performances, allow people going into the winter break to then see, okay, I can see coming back that Aberdeen game wasn't a one-off, because if it is a one-off before the winter break, then that's what it will be seen as until anything else happens.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about those games coming up and the defence that Rangers have at the moment. Now, this is nothing against Leon King. He's learning on the job. He's a baby in terms of his footballing career, but he's had it's going to be a harsh lesson for him this Champions League campaign. I don't think many Rangers supporters or he himself would have imagined he'd have played so many games, so many minutes in this Champions League campaign. Him and James Sands at the back, Joshua, I've got to say, that makes me concerned heading into not only the match at the weekend up in Perth against St Johnstone, but the matches after that, of course, Hearts next week. And St Mirren, isn't it, before the break for
St Mirren away, I think, is a week on Sunday. So, Ben Davies could be back. I think Derek, the manager, said his press conference that he was hopefully be back for the weekend, and I imagine that Rangers will be more concerned with getting those points in the league at this stage, given where they were in the Champions League before that. But it looked like a team that was missing 10 first-team players. But even within that, it's a bit misguided, that 10 first-team players, because within that you've got players like Helander, Ruth. And
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's not as if you've got 10 actual starters that are out. This is well, issues have kind of persisted over the entirety of the season so far. And again, if you looked at it from the start and you said in that Champions League group, Rangers aren't going to be able to beat anyone, that wouldn't have been the most shocking statement because of the level. But again, it's the manner of the performance, and that's why there was so much. I think Aberdeen at the weekend was to the other extreme because of the manner of the performance, because people want to see the process, they want to see the building blocks being put in place for a successful team. And as we've said already about 10 times, that last night certainly did not do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Question coming in here from Scott Wiley. Annapolis, I think. Where is that? Let us know where that is. Scott, good to have your company. I think we have to get to the January window and strengthen the first team and give Gio a run with some players that aren't constantly injured. That's easier said than done, as we mentioned, those run of games. Joshua, now we have heard that there's so many players due back by the time the World Cup break ends. I mean, Rangers will be like having a brand new squad, but then again, you can't rely on a number of players. I think the big players for me that Rangers have missed, Connor Goldson and Tom Lawrence for me is the one. It just offers Rangers that something a little bit different in the middle of the park. Midfield has been a problem, even when he does return. Rangers, for me, have to strengthen in that area in January, and I'm talking signing players for money and starters in the team.
I agree. I agree. But also, I think you might see John Lundstrom now play a bit higher. I don't know if that's something that will stick. I don't know if James Sands is necessarily the answer at the base of midfield, but I thought with that, the athleticism that they give you as a combination with Lundstrom's ability to go forwards, that kind of solved some issues. But again, within that, it's a little bit like the Sakala situation or the McGregor-McLaughlin situation. We're now in November, and the template that was put in place in the summer and has been changed so much. And again, that might just be the manager's style. But I think people, again, perhaps from the outside looking in with not the benefit of what's going on obviously inside the training grounds, maybe struggle to see the joined up thinking with that. Personally, I quite like Lundstrom higher up when there was space. I don't think away from home that'll be a bad thing whatsoever. Because last night, without the likes of him and even Sands in the midfield, who I thought brought a lot of just control and picked up a lot of loose balls and gave Rangers balance, and without the ball, a lot of athleticism. Obviously, he's a lot younger than Stephen Davis. Maybe away from home, in particular, that could kind of free up the more offensive players to do their thing. Last night, without him in the middle, even though he's not been great in the Champions League, yeah, you saw midfield that, as I think a lot of people have said, is as needed, invested in for a long time. I think actually the most money that Rangers have spent on a midfielder, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but it might be Charlie McCann in recent years, because you've obviously got Glenn Kamara, 50k, Lundstram free, Davis free, Jack free, Arfield free. Now that's a little bit of a coy statement, because obviously players are coming in of a higher quality than Charlie McCann when he came in. But they've not. The point is they've not went and spent money in that position as they have in other areas, and I think that you can see that.
Yeah, and as Kenny rightly points out, we have a new full scouting team, so we need to identify targets that will make a difference. We'll win anything this season with this squad, and that's a feeling amongst many supporters. Incremental Assassin gets in touch. He says Morelos and Kamara are empty jerseys come January. They need to be gone. Morelos came on last night, Joshua. Now, how has he missed that opportunity? He's done the hard work where he's dispossessed the Ajax goalkeeper. For me, it just looks like he's panicked, a nosebleed, a rush of blood to the head, and he's not thought about it, and he's fired it wide. That, and obviously the sitter last week against Napoli. It's sad to watch Morelos at the moment. We all know the player he can be, but there's something not quite right there. We all know about his contract situation. Come January time, he'll be free to agree a deal with any other club. What's your feeling about Morelos at this point in time, Joshua?
I agree with you. You look at him, Kamara. I thought Kent actually did okay in patches last night. And Kent, even when he's having bad runs of form, he never stops trying to take the ball and keeps trying. So I won't include him in this conversation. But it is sad watching Morelos, because you have a player there that, I think of the heights he hit in 2019, he seemed to drop off somewhat after the title-winning season, and then Van Bronckhorst seemed to get him on an upward trajectory again. And at the moment, obviously partly because he can't get into the team ahead of Antonio Cholak, but it does feel so far away from where he thought he would be at 2026. Not just at what club he'd be, because I'm not trying to suggest that he would have moved on quicker, but where he'd be regarding his goals, regarding his overall play, maybe back in the international squad, given he was in it a few years ago. And again, this all comes into not just squad building, but squad timing, the right time to sell players. Why, if Glenn Kamara, and yes, he's been injured, but can anyone say he's one of the manager's first picks at the moment? Based on the start of the season, I don't think so. So why was he kept this summer if that was the case and someone else wasn't brought in? Morelos and Kent were kept on last summer. Is that with the foreknowledge of them signing contracts or not? We obviously don't know. But how much would you have got for those three players at the peak of their powers? At the end of that title-winning season, or a lot of money. And now, how much are you going to get for them if the contract situations remain the same?
That's football. Unfortunately, it's player power and what have you. Of course, we've seen it last season with Connor Goldson, where a player was allowed to run down his contract, and I think it surprised everyone when he signed a new deal. However, with Kent and Morelos, I think it looks more than likely they'll be heading for pastures new. And is that a bad thing? I'm not entirely sure, given the performances this season. A couple of interesting points coming in here. Andy Mitchell says last night was a sad indictment on the standard of Scottish football. It was, last season Rangers overachieved. There's no doubt about it. This season, they may have the worst Champions League record, but they still have more coefficient points than anyone else in Scotland, which shows you the standard of teams faring in Europe. Rangers have carried Scottish football for the last few years, and it's of course this season, Union and PSV aside, it's been a pretty disastrous campaign, yet they've still done better than anyone else, which doesn't bode well for Scottish football. This point from Craig Marshall: Gio and Tav's comments very concerning. Our captain said we lacked fight. This was an interesting one, Joshua. James Tavernier last night saying they lacked a sort of fight, and especially that first half. He discussed, I think, about the changes to the team they were enforced, of course, but worrying words again. It's that whole read the room sort of stuff. What do fans want to hear? And alarm bells get set off when they hear this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I didn't actually hear that after the game, but yeah, not great.
Yeah.
It's a difficulty with a situation like this, Derek, when there's so much, I think, frustration, and then a performance like that just emphasises everything. Going forward, Rangers for these remaining 3 league games need to show all those intangibles, because that is what I think provoked some encouragement against Aberdeen. But at the moment, before Van Bronckhorst came in, obviously Conor Goldson made those similar comments, I think, after the League Cup semi-final against Hibs. I think I'm right in saying that the dressing room had lost a little bit of fight, and the road to Seville, I think, was naturally all-consuming up until this season. And this season has been Van Bronckhorst's opportunity to try and build something. And you see, aside from all the discussion about levels and squad building, and you're right to say it's football in a sense that managers rarely probably work in ideal circumstances. Things won't always match up as you hope that they will, but it's what you make of it. And so far, going into November, and with those 3 league games remaining, Rangers started. How would you sum up in a number Rangers started to the season after that PSV game? It would be pretty low. There's not been many strains of encouragement after that win away in Eindhoven.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. I mean, look at Union and PSV, and in the Europa League, PSV beating Arsenal last week. These are good sides. Union qualifying for the knockout phase. So, I mean, it would be understandable given if Rangers were to go out to Union at the first hurdle. We've seen it before when they've had heroic European campaigns in the past. Off the top of my head, Connacht after Manchester, Levski Sofia after the incredible Champions League run in 92-93. So you can understand a hangover perhaps in that first game, but to get those results, especially after that disaster over in Belgium, you just wonder where has it all gone wrong in the group stage campaign. I think when Van Bronckhorst was asked after the PSV game, Joshua, about investment, of course, that there was a few days left of the transfer window remaining for him to strengthen, and it looked like with that qualification they would go into the transfer market and bolster that squad. He did say after Ajax, we were both there, that he was asked about whether in hindsight he would have liked to have added before the window, and he says he was happy with his squad. Looking back on it reflectively, do you think, well, it's quite clear Rangers didn't have the squad capable of fighting at Champions League level, and they should have strengthened between the PSV game and the transfer window closing?
Yeah, but obviously, I think it's Van Bronckhorst's messaging last night about the money is maybe something that should have come before the group stage. I think he made a comment about, then the comments can get misinterpreted, because he said something along the lines of crazy things can happen at the end of the transfer window. Obviously, we don't know what he was alluding to. Maybe it was a player sale that would have then allowed a player to come in. I do think if you look at the transfer window, Ridvan hasn't played much, but I think most people could say that you could see he's going to be a success. You can see, especially away in Napoli, that what he can eventually bring to this team. Cholak obviously has been a fantastic sign. I don't think anyone would argue with that. Lawrence, Tillman, people I think have had complaints about him, but I wrote on the site this week about why I think agreed with John Lundstrom's comments that people need to stick with him, and domestically can be an important player for Rangers. Again, he's a little bit of a victim of the circumstance of coming in as a 20-year-old and having to be ready now for Rangers when he's only played, I think, made 6 senior appearances before coming to Ibrox. Suter obviously is an example of maybe a player who, back last season, he looked to have got over his injury issues. So I think you can understand people saying it's worth the risk. Obviously, then hindsight is a wonderful thing with that one. Matondo hasn't really clicked into gear yet, but it's the lack of continuity, and I think the fact that there wasn't money spent on that midfielder, which, let's not forget, it was Steven Gerrard. One of the, I think, the contentious issues for him last summer was, discussions over the need to invest in that area, especially with Joe Rebo going, who was so important for Rangers. If above anything, how consistently he was there to provide that kind of box-to-box link, and as well as the numbers, although not huge, the numbers that he could provide. So definitely. And then you look at obviously the senior players that were kept on this summer. I think Garfield certainly has shown at the start of the season that he still has a role to play. But he's been called upon a lot, as has been the case in the last 2 seasons, Derek. It does feel like a lot of these issues, the goalkeeping situation, the midfield situation, has been pushed down the road for one too many seasons. And now, Rangers are kind of feeling the ramifications of that decision.
Yeah, and this point from Ross, I totally agree with this. He says it's very much get to the World Cup now and come back with a real refreshed squad for the second half of this season. I'll take 3 ugly wins in the league right now. All about staying in touch. Yeah, depressingly, that is the case. I think, Ross, there's not much to look forward to at the moment as far as Rangers are concerned. This point from the Blue Yonder. Hi, chaps. Lots of talk about Gio, but we have a striker coaching Mackay, yet their composure in front of goal is shocking. What do you make of that, Joshua? That, for me, summed up Fashion Sakala at the end. Now, we all love him. He's a breath of fresh air, but we all know his capabilities and his weaknesses, and we've seen it in full flow last night when I thought he did pretty well, actually. Lost count the number of Ajax players that were booked for hauling him back when he beat him for good close control and pace. However, in front of goal, there was a moment when he done well, a good bit of skill to beat 1 or 2 Ajax players, and then launched it into Rosed. His shooting is diabolical at times, isn't it? But in terms of this point from the Blue Yonder, what do you make of that in general terms? I don't think Rangers, did they have apart from the penalty and Tavernier's free kick, did they have a shot on target apart from that?
I will find out because I can't think off the top of my head. I don't think Sakala's finishing is one of them from last night. That's what sticks out as an issue to me, because I agree with you. I thought he was one of Rangers' more positive players. He managed to beat his man on the right, as you say, a lot of yellow cards. And yes, he lacks a little bit of composure, but I think he gives you more than he doesn't give you at the moment, especially compared to some of his teammates. Other shots you had, obviously Morelos missed from close range, Sakala's missed into injury time. Arfield clipped the bar from the edge of the box, just hit the top of the bar.
Yeah,
and James Tavernier tested the goalkeeper right into his hands from range. Aside from that, nothing. The expected goals is pretty high because of the penalty. Rangers obviously had the penalty, which is a 0.778 expected goals, and Morelos' shot, which was a 0.69 expected goals. So that kind of gives a little bit of a false perception of the fact that they actually had the higher expected goals in Ajax. Probably an example of when that needs to be contextualised, that stat. Čolak obviously has brought a lot of composure in front of goal. Without Čolak, where would you be this season? Probably not worth thinking about for Rangers. That's a bit of a stupid argument as well, maybe, because they're not without him. They do have him. And you, again, to go back to that point, it felt like a team that was missing a number of key players. I'd be interested to know, these 3 games going forward, Derek, what you think there needs to be continuity for me in that team going into these final few games. For me, I think that Sands and Lundstrom in midfield with Tillman, Sakala, Kent, Čolak might not be what everyone would choose, but it's maybe the best Rangers we've got at the moment. Would like to see Alex Lowry play, maybe rotate with Tillman in there as well. He obviously came on last night for his first senior appearance since his injury.
Yeah, great to see. Even though I think this calls it maybe at fault for their 3rd goal, but I'm not going to lay too much blame on him. It's just great to see him back in the Rangers jersey, Joshua, isn't it? He's a player that the fans have been crying out for, just a little bit of hope, a little bit of creativity that they've been so badly lacking, I think. This point from Alan Wright, lots of corners again, no outcome, need more from the training ground. Tom Colshaw, I'm sure, is looking for a job. Would you get him back and get the set pieces sorted again? It did seem. I mean, we've seen it great first hand on Saturday. Barisic's ball for Tavernier, and a few good balls into the box. But again, last night, just failing to pick out a blue jersey.
Yeah, we wrote about the corner lack of threat from corners. I want to say about a month ago, Derek. It's something we'll definitely revisit in the break. But yeah, as I say, when I wrote that story, I think Rangers' expected goals from corners was something like the third worst in the league. These are all the small things that make a difference. All the small things that all the top teams do, expertly well. Liverpool and Man City make the most out of corners because and maybe not Liverpool this season, but is a good example. But it's all about taking the most out of fine margins. And I'm not saying that Rangers aren't trying to do that, but they've not been able to. I think one of the issues as well is you look at that team. What stuck out to me at the weekend was, I think I'm right in saying James Sands was actually at the edge of the box when corners were coming in the second half. And if that's one of your centre halves who's at the edge of the box instead of attacking the ball, I think that probably tells of the lack of aerial threats, the lack of dominating aerial threats you have in that team, especially when you take out Connor Goldson, someone like Liam Balogun or Philip Hollander, who in the past have contributed in that way. Leon King obviously isn't the biggest either. So yeah, I think Rangers are suffering a little bit from the makeup of the team when it comes to set pieces, but I totally agree with the comment. They don't look threatening from it. And there is teams that, Aston Villa is a good example because they're, I think it's Austin McPhee. There is teams that maybe they have a slightly bigger unit, but they're inventive and they do different things and they make the most of it. And that it's all these small things that can swing games. You just have to look back to the Old Firm win in Rangers' title winning season under Gerrard. That corner, that Rebo front post flick on, it's such small margins. Corners played a huge part in that season. Last season, Rangers scored 15 goals from corners in the league. That's a lot of goals. And this season, is it 1 or 2?
It's not good enough.
So that tells a story in and of itself.
Yeah, I just want to touch on a couple of more points before we wrap up, Joshua. First of all, Andrew Finlayson says it. What's the XG for their first goal? If you can quickly check that. We'll just check for you, Andrew, just now.
Yeah, got to hear. So if the first goal, the expected goal was 0.13, but the post-shot expected goal. So remember, expected goal gives you a measure of the likelihood, the chance going in, but the post-shot expected goal takes into consideration the shot, the power of the shot, defenders' positioning. So it's effectively telling you how good the goalkeeping was, how good the shot was. So that went up to 0.57. So a relatively high likelihood. We'll get to McGregor's numbers in a minute. The second goal from Kudus at 0.19 expected goals, but turned into 0.9 was I think was that one that took a deflection. So that probably
it came off King.
Okay. And then the final one, 0.15 post shot expected goal, 0.31. Alan McGregor is off his line because he's having to rush out, but similar to the Liverpool, it felt similar to those goals conceded against Liverpool in the second half where McGregor was kind of so far off his line and as a result, the goal went in a bit too easily. It was also a good touch by their forward. And while you're speaking, Derek, I'll just find McGregor's numbers, which I have now. So minus 0.65 goal saved above average. So not a disastrous performance by McGregor, but it's again, your goalkeeper isn't maybe overperforming in these areas or hitting what you need. And that's one of many factors along with the rest of the team. It's not just McGregor that's maybe a little bit underperforming. It's the rest of the team. But we don't need to revisit the goalkeeper debate. I feel we've done that about 20 times over the last year, Derek. But I think, again, it's probably an indictment of something being pushed down the roads that, along with other areas in the team, you see the impact of it when you're going up against the European elite, as Rangers have done in this Champions League.
Yeah. John Hines says, sort the stats and get some young, hungry players in. So, totally agree, John. But, it's important to have a look at the stats from the game as well, as every club pretty much now do. This point as well from Walnuts. Okay, Sakala up top with Cholak. I think it would work so well. What would you say to that, Joshua?
No, I don't think so. Well, I just think he's been better on the right. I just think Rangers don't need to keep chopping and changing. Go with the template that worked against Aberdeen and try and make that work against St Johnstone. I'd say you need to use the winter break as something of a mini pre-season. I know for a fact that Rangers will have a good 2 weeks of at least of training time to work after. I'm sure there's an initial break after the World Cup. So I think Sakala's been good on the right. Keep him there. Get 3 wins under your belt. And that's all Rangers can hope for in a couple of positive performances. But it's going to be hard, I think, when you've suffered so many heavy defeats. How many heavy defeats have Rangers suffered this season, Derek? 6 already, or 5 if you include the Old Firm? Way too many by November. That has to have an impact not only on the morale but also on the squad when you suffer, when you concede goal after goal like that. And what was it, 45 seconds between Rangers penalty and Ajax's third last night? I mean, what can you say about that?
Yeah, Kenny says, please tell me when I'm going to Dubai. I don't think the club are, Kenny. It remains to be seen what their plans are. I'm sure they're trying to arrange a couple of friendly games, but whether they go abroad or not remains to be seen. And I like this point from John Payton. Can we ditch terms like XG and get back to my granny could have scored that? I totally agree, John. Get it back, the old school football terminology. It's very much missed. Okay, folks, that will do us there. Thanks to everyone for interacting with the show as ever. It's greatly appreciated. Just a reminder, you can see the little ticker below. We've got that offer on the website. Just £1 for 2 months worth of content. Loads on there just now. It's well worth the money. Head over to rangersreview.co.uk/subscribe for all the details. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. That's totally free. Thousands of you now are signing up to that. So thanks very much for doing so as we bring you daily Rangers coverage. And we'll be back tomorrow as we look ahead to the big build-up towards Sunday against St Johnstone, another must-win for Rangers as they try and keep pace at the top of the Scottish Premiership. Lots coming your way on the website, folks. Keep your eyes peeled. But until then, enjoy the rest of your